Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. In the 1950s and again in the 1990s, Israel and Turkey have been regional partners, almost best friends. They both faced the hostility of their common neighbor separating them, Syria. They were officially, or practically at least, in the Western orbit. And they had no conflict over the body of water they lived next to, the Mediterranean Sea. All that changed over the last 20 years with Turkey at odds with Israel over religion, Palestinians, and energy resources, and pulling away from the United States. Is it reversible, or are Turkey and Israel doomed to remain rivals as long as Ankara is led by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan? Joining us from Istanbul, Turkey, to discuss this topic is Mr. Yusuf Erim, who is the editor-at-large at TRT World. Welcome.
Thank you.
Also joining our panel today from Central Israel is Dr. Eytan Cohen Yanarocak, who is a research fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University, as well as at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And with me here in the studio is our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir. Oren, give us a broader understanding on the relations between Turkey and Israel, as there are relations predominantly on the economic side of things. But at the same situation, the political level we could refer to it at an all-time low.
So the question really is, where does the philosophical end and where does the practical start? Because your question regarding whether it's irreversible, the low ebb that we are in right now, goes back almost 500 years. Because we are sitting here in Jerusalem, a place which for 400 years, from 1517 to 1917, has been under Ottoman rule. The leaders of Israel, when they founded it, David Ben-Gurion, Moshe Sharet, Yitzhak Ben Zvi, not only lived under Ottoman rule, they also went to school in Istanbul. And of course, they knew Turkey and were quite conversant with Ataturk and other leaders. Right now, as you say, over the last 10, 15, 18 years, things are bad. And perhaps they are getting worse before they are getting better, because new issues came up, or in this case, came down into the sea, almost into the seabed, because of energy resources, because of disputes regarding the Mediterranean in general, Turkish relations with Libya, for instance, and other problems. One fine point which bears mentioning is that even if there is a so-called Turan movement of bringing back Turkish glory to those countries where there are Turkish-speaking minorities, or even more than minorities, Israel, the present state of Israel, is not one of them. Of course, it was part of the Ottoman Empire, and when Erdogan speaks about various places, he mentions Jerusalem. But it is not realistic to expect Turkey to try and project power as far south as Israel. It wants to go west, it wants to go east, but apparently not anywhere south of Syria.
Indeed. Mr. Erim, how do they view this in Ankara? At this stage, are we really at an all-time low, or are there different glimpses of a shift, maybe because of the situation in Washington or elsewhere?
First of all, I agree that Turkey's not trying to project power anywhere near Israel. I think Turkey's more concentrated right now on the Balkans, the Southern Caucasus, and Syria. I think these are areas that are much more important to Turkey, areas especially where there are Turkic population like Azerbaijan, very, very important. Turkmens in Syria, very, very important. And many Greek Turks in Greece. These are areas that are top priority. I think Israel is not even on the list of areas that Turkey seeks to project power. Now, I personally, I think the worst in the relationship is well behind us right now. And when we look at the recent developments, not just between both countries, but more from a broader aspect, especially U.S. elections, I think a Turkey-Israel rapprochement is actually inevitable when we look at what's going on in the region. And I think the election of President-elect Joe Biden will actually fast forward this rapprochement between Israel and Turkey. Now, one of the reasons why I say that is while obviously a Biden victory is viewed negatively in Turkey because of what he said in recent comments, I think when we look at what's going to happen in the region and what Biden is going to bring here, will push Israel and Turkey towards each other, most namely bringing back the JCPOA, which he's mentioned many, many times. Now, if you look in the past, Turkey has actually looked warmly on the JCPOA. But we need to realize when those comments were made regarding the Iran nuclear deal, Iran was one of the major energy suppliers for Turkey. That's not the case anymore. Turkey has secured its energy security via Russia, via Azerbaijan, and other countries, and Iran is basically non-existent right now in Turkey's energy portfolio. So the bringing back of the JCPOA really doesn't change anything for Turkey from an energy security standpoint. But what it does is make Iran much richer and provide assets that they can distribute to IRGC, Shiite militia, Hezbollah in the area. Now, while Turkey and Iran work together on a flurry of foreign policy issues, Turkey is not comfortable with the proliferation of these groups along its borders in Iraq and Syria. I mean, when you look east, there's Iran. When you look south, there's Kataib, Hezbollah, and IRGC Shiite militia in Iraq. There's militia in Syria as well. There's Hezbollah in Iran. So Turkey's full southern and eastern border is completely blocked by this Shiite crescent. And yes, Turkey does work with Ankara and Tehran do work together, but that does not mean Turkey's comfortable with this proliferation on its borders. And this is not something that should be viewed lightly in Ankara. And I do believe that this is becoming more and more of a national security threat. And we've seen this bubble over in Idlib when Turkey struck many Hezbollah targets and IRGC targets. And we saw the devastation that it caused just from the amount of graves and coffins that were sent back to Lebanon. So Turkey has been very effective in this matter, and I think it will continue to be effective. Also, the Eastern Mediterranean as well. Israel wants a pipeline. It needs a pipeline for Leviathan. And right now, this pipeline through the Eastern Mediterranean, it's not feasible. We look at a landline that would run through Turkey, it would cost a fraction of the cost of an East Med pipeline. It would be constructed much, much quicker and have much more security than being the longest deep sea bed pipeline when you have an existing network in Turkey already in place.
Well, I understand Turkey's interest in a rapprochement with Israel, especially under a potential Biden administration. But Dr. Cohen Yanarocak, does Israel have an interest in having a rapprochement with Turkey, considering also the fact that its relations with Greece and the Greek Cypriots has never been better? And the fact of the matter is the Greek lobby in the Democratic Party is almost as powerful as the Jewish lobby, and it has especially now a lot of significance for Israel, considering the recent years where Jerusalem has had its relations at an all-time high, rather with the Republican Party than the Democratic Party in the United States, which may also change the power balance of Israel in the United States.
Well, I agree with you, Jonathan. But before analyzing this deeply, I would like to emphasize that the architect, the chief architect of the Israeli, Cypriot, and Greek rapprochement is Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and his foreign minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu with their precious loneliness. Beforehand, we all knew that Israel was considered as one of the best allies of Turkey. We conducted together joint air exercises in Konya, and also the intelligence communities shared important information between themselves. But within the years, we all know that this began to diminish. And due to the Turkey's unilateral pro-Palestinian stance, which is criticizing and demonizing Israel on daily basis, Jerusalem had to implement its own agenda, which is based on realpolitik. And according to this worldview, of course, Jerusalem began to launch a rapprochement with Nicosia, with Athens, and as a result, we came to the current point. But I also would like to emphasize that despite this rapprochement with Greece and Cyprus, from my understanding, Turkey is still a very important component for the national security of Israel, as the most important Muslim nation in the Eastern Mediterranean. I truly believe that Israel should do everything in order to strengthen its relations with Turkey. But while doing that, Israel should also persuade its Turkish counterparts that this should be done in a genuine normalization, which means that Israel bashing should be over. I personally, if I was a decision maker in Jerusalem, of course, I could monitor the Turkish media, and I could also monitor the Turkish government officials' statements. And whenever I'm seeing statements like Jerusalem is our city, or these kind of statements, I would like to tell you that from my understanding, unfortunately, even if I really want to even if I want to launch a cooperation with Turkey, I would think twice. So in this regard, if Turkish decision makers would like to implement a real partnership with Israel, they should change their policy towards Israel and towards Palestinians, and they should also clarify this and emphasize this, and also highlight this with their concrete statements, so that there can be some mutual trust between the two countries. Unfortunately, nowadays we do not see this mutual trust between Jerusalem and Ankara.
Mr. Erim, your response to that?
Well, first of all, I highly doubt President Erdogan is going to change his stance on Palestine, but I think what can be done is that it can be taken off the bilateral menu and put on a multilateral menu, and only be discussed at areas like the OIC and the United Nations. We've seen Turkey be able to compartmentalize problems with other countries and have very, very fruitful relationships. For example, the Uyghur issue in China, Crimea and Russia, other countries that it's been able to compartmentalize polarizing problems with, and look forward and work on issues that both countries see eye to eye in. And I think that this is very, very possible with Israel as well, because both countries have a very experienced and pragmatic leadership. So I don't see why it can't be done. And they obviously have a very, very long history of cooperation, dating back, predating Israel. So the basis is there. Both of these countries, along with the United States, basically make up the Middle Eastern security architecture of the 80s and 90s. The intelligence agencies have a deep-rooted history of cooperation together, and their cooperation still exists to this day, despite deteriorating ties as well. So I do think that compartmentalization is going to be very, very important. What's also going to be important is who's going to be the face of this rapprochement. Now, we're obviously, even if there is a rapprochement, we're not going to see Erdogan and Bibi hugging anytime soon. They're not going to be shaking hands anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that these two countries cannot have a thawing in relations. And I think that the faces of these of this rapprochement will be very important. In my mind, I could foresee maybe on the Israeli side, Benny Gantz being a face for Israel, On the Turkish side, I could see maybe either the Turkish Vice President, Fuat Oktay, being the face, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar being the face of this rapprochement, or possibly the Energy Minister, because a rapprochement would most likely be based on the topic of either security or energy, or both of these topics being combined as the major intersecting and converging interests between both countries. So these are potential faces for this rapprochement in this coming period, that these guys can serve as interlocutors for both of their states as they try to work together and compartmentalize these problems and work to their strengths.
Mr. Oren?
Let me second Yusuf's recommendation regarding the generals or retired generals on either side. He mentioned General Askar and General Gantz, perhaps General Ashkenazi too. When they were chiefs of staff before their current positions, they used to meet at NATO conferences, because NATO, having expanded its consultations to the Mediterranean dialogue and to the Istanbul cooperative initiative, invited all of these generals, and they know each other, even if slightly. Of course, other people have trained together, have met, and as Yusuf mentioned, MIT and Mossad have kept their channels open. Now, one more point is that if there is a renewed push by President-elect Biden for an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, and if Hamas is part of it somehow, or at least there is a long armistice, a hudna, or at least a tahadiyah between Israel and Hamas, then of course Turkey will not be more Catholic than the Pope or more Muslim than Yahya Sinwar.
Indeed. Dr. Cohen, Yanarocak, to what degree do you see the possibility in which a political framework would be established in order to find common ground in exploiting the resources beneath the Eastern Mediterranean, in which Turkey would become a party to the East Med Forum, which also includes some of Turkey's greatest rivals to the south, most notably, of course, Egypt, which may also demand a change of geopolitical strategy for Ankara with regard to Northern Africa, which may not necessarily go in line with Ankara's future plans. How do you see all of this playing along?
Well, I need to emphasize that from my understanding, Turkey needs to make a real shift in its own foreign policy, which means that if Turkey would like to sit together and cooperate together with Egypt, with Israel, even with Cyprus and Greece, so Turkey should basically sit down and should negotiate, and it should leave this brinkmanship policy what we are seeing in the Eastern Mediterranean. And besides that, I would also like to emphasize once again that all of these relationships should be genuinely normalized. Mr. Erim mentioned that this new relationship between Israel and Turkey should be, the face of this relationship should be Benny Gantz or other generals. But from my understanding, if we are talking about a genuine normalization process, so this should be done in the people-to-people level,
but
which
Dr.
means, at least the foreign ministers should involve in it.
Dr. Yanarocak, nevertheless, the forum also consists of Jordan, which the relations between Jerusalem and Amman are currently quite chilled, and the Palestinian Authority, which right now has frozen any contacts with Jerusalem on any level. So the question is, why not Turkey? Why cannot Turkey also participate in such a forum?
I did not say that Turkey should not participate or cannot participate. From my understanding, from the very first day, Turkey should take place, because from my understanding, again, Turkey is limiting itself with this precious loneliness foreign policy doctrine. From my perspective, it's a huge mistake. Okay, I'm not telling that Turkey shouldn't. Indeed. On contrary, Turkey should, and I think Turkey is very late. instead of sending its fleet to the Eastern Mediterranean and publishing NAVTEX, Turkey had to be present in the very beginning of this forum. Okay, this is my understanding. But I'm again emphasizing that the face of this normalization should be civil. Okay, for instance, last week, approximately 2 weeks ago, when we witnessed this Izmir earthquake, the Israeli government, issued a call in order to provide humanitarian aid to Turkey, and this call was sent by the Israeli defense minister. From my understanding, this is a huge mistake. Instead of the Israeli defense minister, this call had to be dispatched, this call had to be sent to Turkey via foreign ministry. Of course, I know that Turkey didn't accept none of the humanitarian aid offers, but still, Israel is doing a huge mistake when it is only defining its relationship with Turkey on the basis of security issues. That's what we did during the 1990s, and we could not penetrate into the Turkish society. Okay, so none of the Turkish people are very much impressed by Israeli foreign policy. We could not influence them. We could only influence the army generals who are not in power anymore in Ankara. So Israel, if it really wants to launch a genuine normalization with Ankara, it should be very much be aware of the fact that this new normalization should be based on civilian infrastructure with foreign ministries. And yes, if we are going to call this normalization as a genuine normalization, so Israel should demand the face of President Erdoğan there.
Indeed.
Otherwise, no one can call this a genuine normalization.
Mr.
I
Erim?
think you're looking too many steps down the road. I think we should concentrate more on step 1 and step 2. What you're talking about is step 3, 4, and 5.
Unfortunately, when we are looking at the history of the bilateral relations, everyone told us that we are always looking at the step 3 and step 4, and we could never focus on step 1 and step 2. Okay, so from my understanding, this should be done in a proper way, and otherwise, I'm not calling it a genuine normalization. Apologies.
Mr. Erim, I'd like to hear you on this. And of course, on the economic level, Israel and Turkey have been very close. I think construction companies have been very active in the area of Tel Aviv. Many of the high-rise buildings have been constructed by Turkish companies. There is, at some stages, of course, now with the corona crisis, less so, but Turkish Airlines is one of the most frequent airliners to visit Tel Aviv airport. And it seems that on the civic level, there is a lot of cooperation, but on the political level, there is a complete disconnect. To what degree do you think there may shine some glimpses of hope on the political level? And what kind of process would there need to be undergone in order to make something like that possible?
Well, first of all, bilateral trade, I believe, was at a record high in 2018. I don't know if the 2019 figures were record high, but they were very, very close. So we've seen that commercially and economically, the political side is not impacting trade between both countries, as they're greatly enjoying a tremendous amount of trade. Now, how can this be taken a step forward? As I said, one of the most important things will be to compartmentalize the Palestinian issue and take it off the leadership's plate. I think one of the best ways to be able to do this is the creation of maybe a presidential envoy to look at the Palestinian issue. And this would compartmentalize it, take it out of Erdogan's rhetoric, and keep it under a position of a presidential envoy who would be looking at the issue and trying to negotiate. I think that could be a possible first step. And also, as I mentioned before, only bringing these issues up at the United Nations, at the OIC, only on multilateral platforms where multiple countries are discussing it. And it's not just Turkey talking at Israel. It's a block of countries who support the Palestinian issue, which Turkey would be a part of, versus a block of countries who support Israel's stance, where it's, like I said, it's not a bilateral friction going on. So I think these are very important ways that this Palestinian issue, this hurdle, could be bypassed. And as I also mentioned before, there's so many converging interests between these countries, and a possible rapprochement would have an earthquake effect on the geopolitical dynamics of the Middle East. Everyone's calculations right now will be completely upended with a Turkey-Israel rapprochement. Yes, Israel has improved its relations with UAE and Egypt and Greece, but these are all minor players. These are all minor players. Turkey's the only country that has the capacity to change realities on the ground and also diplomatic realities through their influence in many, many countries. And this is an incredible asset to Israel. And what Israel brings is very important assets as well. Its lobby power in the United States, security cooperation in areas like Syria. Both parties view Assad as a national security threat. They view the regime as a national security threat, and they view this growing hegemony of Shia militia as a national security threat. So we have energy cooperation right now. We have security cooperation right now. We have trade cooperation right now. So this is an incredible platform, an incredible basis to be able to create this rapprochement on. And it could be very, very fruitful in a win-win scenario very easily for both countries.
Mr. Oren?
There's no reason to disagree with any of what Mr. Erim just said. Just to add to it, there are great prospects for a Biden administration because the America First policy will no longer guide Washington. And if the alliance, including NATO, is coming back to the agenda, then even through that, when Mr. Biden goes to Ankara and meets with Mr. Erdoğan and pleads Israel's case too, one may see an opening for a thaw.
If, of course,
He will. He obviously will. They all go.
We will see. But of course, this may be part of a package deal, and we will have to discuss more of this in the future. I'd like to thank Dr. Cohen, Yanarocak, Mr. Erim, and Mr. Oren for being in today's panel. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.